Elvis and Me recounted the intimate details of her life with the king of rock and roll. You were 14 years old. Elvis was 24, right? How did your parents allow a 14-year-old teenager, baby, to be with this then superstar of...
It was not easy on my parents. You know, first of all, it was just an innocent meeting. And of course, you know, I was excited and I was reluctant because I didn't think they'd ever let me go. But it was just a one-time opportunity. That's all they thought it would be. I never expected him to ask me back. They never expected him to ask me back.
But Elvis did ask you back, and you saw him again and again. And you would get home very late at night and be exhausted the next day when you had to go to school. And your parents let you go again and again.
You know, when you're in love, it's hard to fight. And I was rebellious somewhat, meaning I didn't want to go to school, or I said I wouldn't go to school. Please let me, you know, he'd be out of my life after 6 months, and, you know, don't ruin my life, because I really cared. And he came to the house, and he was charming. He was wonderful, and my family had a lot of faith in him.
What was Elvis Presley like then?
He was insecure. He was, you could talk to him as a person. You knew who he was. You knew his fears. He had, he was so vulnerable. He was gentle. He was fun. He was just, he was a person you could really deal with.
You write in your book, you're 14, Elvis would take me into his bedroom, and then we would kiss long, deep, passionate kisses, and his caresses would leave me weak with desire.
Yeah, it's true.
Yet he never tried to go further than kissing you.
No. No, he didn't. There was an agreement, I guess, he made with himself that the woman that he decided to take for his wife, he was going to keep her that way until he married her.
Keep her a virgin no matter what.
Right.
What do you think attracted a 24-year-old star to a 14-year-old inexperienced? Or am I telling you just as I say that? Is that what attracted him to you?
The inexperience, yes. I think Elvis had been around Hollywood already. He had already seen Hollywood, quote-unquote, starlets. So I think in his own mind, he thought, well, I'll just be with someone and teach her as it comes. And I don't think a lot of older women would have put up with a lot of the things that went on. I mean, you know, because when you're young, you kind of... I listened to him and did what he said. What woman around his age, let's say 24 or 25, would want to go out with a lot of guys when they went out?
He was almost always with an entourage.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Even then, in Germany, when you had trouble getting up for classes, Elvis gave you Dexedrine. First time you'd seen pills. I didn't know what was going on as far as, you know, pills or what they were, sleeping pills. I mean, he gave them to me to be helpful. To say, look, if it's really getting really bad and you're not doing well, you know, take a couple of these. But he was very cautious about them, and he said, don't take them a lot, and just take them if you really need them. Elvis went back to America, was released from the service. You stayed in Germany. When you were 15, he says, come live with me in Memphis. And your parents said, okay.
In my parents' defense, they were going through it. They were having a hard time with this, but I was in love. And they were caught between, well, if we don't let her go, you know, she'll sneak off and do it, or she'll catch a plane and go. My mother would cry and going, I don't know what to do. You know, and I felt badly because I did go through a lot.
Looking back, do you think your parents should have let you go to Memphis?
Yes.
Why?
Why? Because, who knows, I maybe wouldn't have been married and had the child I have. I don't think they made a mistake. I think they were wise.
Did Elvis mention marriage when you first moved to Memphis?
He was reluctant in mentioning marriage. Very little.
When Elvis wanted entertainment, he would rent a whole movie theater or rent a playground or fly across the country for a peanut butter sandwich. What was this like for you as a kid?
It was a slow involvement. he didn't do it all at once. You know, things just started happening. And then it was a part of my life. If you want something, you get a plane to go get it. If you want to do something, you make arrangements and you call across the country, and it just happens. I didn't do it myself, but you had people taking care of everything for you. Nothing, I did nothing. Everything was taken care of.
And during the day, you got up and went to high school. Came home in the afternoon. You said sometimes you'd crawl into bed with Elvis at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and he was just getting up and didn't even know you were gone.
I worked that out.
And then you stayed up most of the night?
Yeah.
And took pills to go to sleep?
I had to, because we got home so early in the morning. He would sleep until 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and then he'd get his sleep. So I'd be lucky if I got another half hour in.
At one point, you said, in the early stages of your living there, that he gave you 2 pills. Placidil, was it called?
Yes.
And you almost died. And he didn't call a doctor.
Well, I forgot, I think, the fact that I had never taken pills and he had given me 2, because he was used to taking 2. It didn't, you know, didn't bother him. And he gave them to me. And I was knocked out for about 2 days.
You wrote, there were times when you and Elvis spent days in the bedroom. Freezing bedroom, he liked it very cold. The windows with blackout drapes, so no sunlight entered, day after day.
It went into weeks. Yes, we stayed like that. We had our food delivered by the door. And it was cold. I mean, he did like it cold, and it was dark. And it could get real lonely. And that's how he liked it at times, like a cocoon.
So this is this bizarre life of being able to have or buy anything you want, loneliness, days of being alone with him in darkened rooms, pills, and you loved him. Was he good to you?
Very.
Was he also bad to you?
When you say bad to me, I don't think there's, it wasn't bad to me in a way that, you know, intentional bad. Elvis went through an awful lot, and I think the communication that we had was very difficult and different, and I had to make it work. I had to do it. I mean, with a fear of a young girl fearing that if I didn't do it, maybe someone would take my place. I always had that fear, well, if I don't do this, someone's going to do it, and I wanted to be the one.
More of my interview with Priscilla Presley in a moment. You wrote, Elvis controlled your looks, your clothes, your hair, your makeup. He controlled you totally. Is that accurate?
I was definitely under a spell of what I thought was love. And I have to take responsibility for that, too.
And even though he wanted you virginal and pure, he dressed you, as you write, like a tart. Sequin, shiny material, low cut, slit up the side. Why?
I think maybe it was his way of showing sophistication. Maybe making me appear older. I don't know. There's some kind of an appeal that men like with a trashy kind of look. Maybe he liked that.
6 years you lived there before he decided to marry you. In those 6 years of sleeping with him every night, he never had intercourse with you. You wrote in your book that there were times when you begged him. I even wrote it down. You said, I'm a woman who needs to make love, to feel desired by her man. Please don't make me beg. 6 years of that? Priscilla, why?
Well, again, you know, I can only go back to what his concept was as what he wanted in a woman. And somewhere he, along in his past, he said that he wanted a virgin.
Yet, you also write that you and Elvis took dozens and dozens of Polaroid pictures acting out your fantasies. You learned to turn him on sexually even though you never had intercourse. You did say, though, under no circumstances were his ideas or playfulness ever perverted.
No.
Do you feel the same way today now that you're older and you look back?
No, I can't say it's a perversion. I really can't say that. I mean, nothing was harmful. Nothing was done in bad intent. Nothing was done, you know, that I don't think is unusual.
He would leave you. He would go off to make pictures. He would go off to Las Vegas. And you heard about other women.
Mm-hmm.
How'd you feel? What'd you do about it?
I felt horrible. It was almost a part of, it was the fear that I had too. I didn't want him to leave my sight. I wanted to be with him, because if I left him again, that fear always came in. I'm going to lose him.
You wrote in your book that one of your greatest worries was about his co-star, Anne Margaret.
Yes, that's true. I knew there was an affair.
And if you confronted him?
If I confronted him, he'd deny it.
Or get mad?
Well, that's usually what happens when you're caught.
So you live with that?
Yes.
What about his temper? We hear a lot about that temper.
Yes, he did have a temper. He did. It was unpredictable. It's funny now when you think about it, because his temper was always, I think, burst of either it's frustration, but I think because he had the power and the money to destroy, he could just replace it like that.
If Elvis didn't like a performer on television, he would go bang, bang, and shoot the television set. Then it would be all gone.
Yes. He'd just blow them off the air. That's simple. And the television would be placed like that.
Before you turned around, there'd be a new set. But he carried guns all the time.
Yes, he did. He had a love of guns, and he had a collection of guns, and I guess it's another way of feeling that power.
Sometimes when he was irrational, he did hurt you. He once gave you a black eye. He once threw a chair at you. You didn't like something he sang.
No.
And he threw a chair at you.
And it had records on it, and the records went all over the place.
Priscilla, will you tell me what was so wonderful about him?
The real him, the real Elvis, was generous, wonderful, sensitive, considerate.
Finally comes that happy day when you get married in 1967. 1 year almost to your wedding night, your baby was born.
Yes.
You think the baby was conceived in your wedding night?
I would say so.
And here you have this beautiful baby. And now you find, as you write, now you find that your husband doesn't want to go to bed with you.
Yes. Elvis had a hard time dealing with mother and the little girl that I was to him. And that's, I didn't know it then, but that's how I found and realized in later years that he was a father to me. He was my mentor. To show any kind of vulnerability and security to me was not macho, was not something that he felt I should see. So our communication was horrible. It was terrible. I mean, today, I would probably be able to communicate with him much more. I would, know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to deal with it then. Yeah. You can just be so much to someone. I mean, I was everything to him, but there's times that you have to think of yourself. And I didn't want to go along with the program anymore. And we all have to take responsibility for ourselves. And that's when it hit me. I had to take responsibility for my own self. I couldn't be a life support.
And one day you went in and said, I'm leaving. And both of you changed. How did you change?
I wasn't living in the real world. I was living in a bubble. And I found that I had my own taste. I had things that I liked that weren't Elvis's. I found Priscilla.
And Elvis changed. I mean, I remember those pictures of Elvis in those last years, that fat, bloated man. What did you think happened to him?
We talked a lot after we had broken up. In fact, we had become very close. And again, the insecurity set in, age set in. He had a horrible fear of approaching 40. It was coming very rapidly. He wasn't satisfied, wasn't happy with where his career was. And it was difficult to be around, to see it.
One of the major questions that has been asked, did he die from drugs?
It probably took its toll. I think that matched with his weight, stress. The last few years, he didn't take care of himself. And despite what has been said, people did try to get him to take care of himself and to go into the hospital, but he honestly thought he had it under control. He did not think, he was that bad.
The fact that even with all of the all of the things about him that are very disturbing when you read about it today. And as I talk to you, we brought out a lot of information that's painful. And yet you still do love him. You still do think well of him.
I do. I never not loved him.
Do you still love him?
Absolutely.
How would you want Elvis to be remembered?
I think the early years, I look at that and I think that's Elvis. He was having fun. You can see it in his films. He was a very humble man, a great sense of humor. And his biggest joy was being on stage.